Thanks a lot for joining me today. So I'm here to talk to you today about modern partner marketing and how we can use new techniques to win, keep and grow customers. I am Eoin Rogers, Head of Planning. I don't really know why I felt the need to put a photo of myself there when I'm here, so I'm here but also there. I run the strategy and planning team at Direction Group. We are an IT and tech specialist agency, and like Paul says, we've been working with Microsoft and partners for a long time. We position ourselves as the demand generators for IT and tech companies because a lot of the work that we do is about generating demand and lead gen and all those great things that you guys will be very interested about. We're based just outside Reading, near Microsoft in TVP. So I thought I would begin by telling you a little bit about what I'm planning to talk to you about today. And Paul, again, kind of set it up quite nicely in that this is quite an exciting time to be a marketer in the B2B space. Today's marketing landscape is always changing. Sometimes it feels like the only constant is change in the marketing industry. But in the B2B sense, the way that we interact with our buyers is changing, and the way that we need to interact with our buyers is changing. The way that we need to interact with the sales force is also changing, and that's bringing about lots of requirements from the marketing team as well. And then finally, the role that marketing plays within the broader business and the value that that's perceived to deliver is also under threat or under challenge. So those are the kind of three tenets of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's begin with a little bit of, I guess, history or navel gazing a little bit. Today's B2B buyers are buying at arm's length, and when I say that, I mean that buyers are more often than not starting their sales and buying process online with a search. But we also know, this is a stat from Forrester, 60 to 70% of that buying journey is done before anybody's ready to speak to sales. So effectively, buyers are educating themselves, they're learning about new things, they're scoping out solutions, and they're checking what's available and what products are there for them to buy, all by themselves. And the kind of villain in this story is the internet. The internet has changed everything. I think we can all kind of appreciate that. Because back in the day, sales owned the buying process. Before the internet, the sales guys had to pick up the phone and tell a new prospect about a new product or a new solution, and then they owned the sales journey from that point forward. But as we've seen from this Forrester stat, sales are being engaged much later in the journey, and that's creating a gap. So the buyers are, heaven forbid, going it alone and doing it by themselves. So this gap has to be addressed by marketing. And I'll talk a little bit later about how inbound and outbound marketing techniques allow us to bridge that gap. But an important point here is that the role for marketing is not just to handhold the buyer up until the point where sales take over or we hand over the lead to the sales department. It's critical that marketing stays involved throughout that process, and we create what we call at Direction Group marketing-enabled sales. So it's that point where some collaboration has to happen, the purple section there in the journey. That's when marketing and sales need to work together and seamlessly to be able to continue that journey and close the deal. So in effect, marketing is working as a wingman. I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea or the concept of a wingman. It's the single guy's best friend when they're out clubbing and pubbing and looking to speak to young women. The wingman is the guy who does the introduction, who sets it all up, who makes that meeting possible. So if we think about marketing in that sense, marketing is all about setting up the conversation. So we're effectively starting the conversation for sales. So if our content and our communications are not available to that B2B buyer when they're looking for that content unaided and before they've spoken to a salesperson, if that stuff's not available and discoverable to them, then we failed in our job, and unfortunately the sales guys will probably never get a chance to speak to that customer because they're going to go somewhere else. So the process that we typically go through looks a bit like this. So we use digital marketing techniques to find the right people, and by digital marketing techniques I mean both inbound and outbound, things like search and social and content creation. Once we've found those people, we use marketing automation to nurture them and to build a relationship with them and to try and add some value through the marketing process. And then finally, at the end, we need to integrate and collaborate with sales to close that deal and maximize the value of that deal. So this is the kind of structure that I'm going to try and stick to for the rest of the presentation, starting off with a little bit about some digital marketing techniques, then talking a little bit about marketing automation and CRM and how they work together to kind of make this process possible, and then finally a little bit about sales enablement and how marketing can at least try and contribute a little bit to the success of the sales teams. But first, let me tell you a little bit about old style marketing. So I mentioned back in the day, sales owned the buying journey. Marketing and brands were in control, they owned the show, but that's not the case anymore. We can't keep interrupting people with our messages, thinking that they're interested, blasting our stuff out there, hoping that some of it will stick, the kind of scattergun approach. It's not good enough anymore. There's been a shift in power, and the power is now in the hands of the buyers. They run the show, they are running their own process, and they will engage with us as marketers and as salespeople when they're ready. So the new way of this is inbound marketing, and Seth Godin is a very famous proponent of this kind of state of mind or way of thinking. And he says, marketing to your customers by repeatedly interrupting them with advertising or selling messages is simply not good enough anymore. Technology has changed all the rules. And by technology, I think we can assume that he means the internet as well as some other digital technology trends. So the internet is the consistent villain in my story. So before we move any further on from that, then let's look at a little bit about what inbound marketing actually is. So it's the process of creating text, audio, video, and other online assets and content and optimizing them to appear, like magic, when prospective customers are ready to pull the trigger on a purchase. So that's what we call inbound marketing, and it's about, like I said earlier, making that stuff available to them and discoverable for when they are going through that journey and they're trying to self-educate and self-serve the information they need to help in their buying process. And the reason inbound is important is because we do live in this self-directed opt-in world. The unsubscribe button on an email or the close window button on your browser is just too easy to click. We have to earn the respect of people, earn their attention, and earn the right to consistently communicate with them. Otherwise, they can just switch us off. Again, the power has shifted from being in our hands to being in the hands of the buyers. So the idea is that if we put enough valuable information out there on the web, the dreaded web, the customers will seek us out because we've got something to say that's valuable and important and helpful to them in their buying journey, rather than waiting for us to blast something out because we want to speak to them. And this idea about content is very important in inbound marketing. And I guess if we think about inbound marketing as trying to catch the fish, then content is definitely the worm on the hook. So they're looking for us, and we need to be available to them when they're looking for us. So let's think about inbound and outbound and what's the difference between the two. So if inbound marketing is all about earning attention organically without interrupting people, then it's things like opt-in email addresses or email lists, and that's lists of people who have subscribed to hear from you, not lists that you've bought or paid for and then mercilessly blast out to. Thought leadership content, that's all about creating interesting and compelling content that people are actually interested and will find on the web and then continually consume. Blogging is a good opportunity, again, for you to put your thoughts and your perspectives out there, but again, it's typically not pushed or promoted in any kind of overtly interruptive way. And public speaking. Hopefully, when you end up in a public speaking environment, the people that are listening to you have actually opted into that and they're finding it interesting and compelling, aren't we? Conversely to that, outbound is about interrupting someone's flow of activities to get your message across. It's rather selfish, really, isn't it, I suppose? But it's things like paid or rented email lists. So when you go to a data broker and you say, I want to speak to all the IT decision makers in the UK with a company size of more than 250 people, and then you email everybody with the same message, just hoping that something's going to stick. That is interruptive marketing, and that's, I guess, not the evil or the thing that we shouldn't be doing, but it's out of sync with what buyers want, and that's what the kind of activity and the kind of behaviors that are going to get people to unsubscribe and stop listening to you as a brand. Print or online advertising, similarly, kind of pushing our ad into situations or positions in magazines and on websites when it's not actually really wanted. It's surplus to requirements, I guess you could think. Outbound sales calls, again, you're picking up the phone to speak to someone because you want to speak to them about something that you want to tell them rather than understanding what they need and responding to that in a helpful way. Social media advertising, everybody's super excited about this currently because it allows you to be so granular and so targeted in who you get to speak to. But again, it's you using those tools to speak to the people because you want to speak to them and you've got something to say rather than responding to some need or desire to hear from you that they have. All said and done, I guess it makes it sound like outbound marketing is the thing that we should all stop doing. But outbound, I don't think, will ever die because sometimes we need to jumpstart the conversation and buyers can't ask to hear about something that they don't know about. So sometimes we need to give them a bit of a jumpstart. And some customers, of course, still prefer to hear from us about things. They expect us to email them about new things, about new solutions, new products, new trends. So there's still a role for outbound. But as we become more and more sophisticated as marketers, I think it's the case that inbound marketing techniques will increase in prominence and the amount of spend that us as marketeers allocate to them over time, but it won't completely replace the traditional outbound. So if sometimes you need to give people a bit of a kickstart to begin that buying process, how do you keep them moving through the process? How do you keep them moving once you've got their attention? And that's all down to lead nurturing. Lead nurturing is probably another one of these buzz terms that you've heard bandied around. People talk a lot about it. Very few people are doing it properly. Lead nurturing is not setting up a succession of 3 emails and blasting them 3 times rather than 1 and saying that that's being, customer-centric. Lead nurturing is about helping prospects through the journey. And of course, you can't help someone on a journey unless you know where they're starting off from. So our friends at Serious Decisions, I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, a marketing kind of analyst group, they have set up what they call a theoretical buyer journey. And it helps us to think about the journey that buyers go through so that we can see how we need to behave to counter their behavior within their own journey. So this is what that journey looks like. And it starts with loosening the status quo. And I guess before you start to go on a journey to buy anything, you have to realize that the current situation that you're in is not adequate. So you need to understand that there's a different way of doing things and that there's maybe a problem in your business that you could solve if you did it differently. The next step along then is about committing to change. So once you've recognized that there could be a change, you and more importantly the rest of the business stakeholders in your business need to get behind that change and actually want to make it happen. The chance here is that unless the business commits to the change, there might be a decision made to just do nothing and continue with the status quo. So the committing to change stage is really important for a buyer internally, as well as just for their own purposes. The next stage, the 2 kind of middle stages of the journey that are in pink there, that's really when they start to look at particular or specific offerings. And it's not that they're looking to you as a vendor at that stage, it's that they're exploring the solutions to a problem, not the solutions you've necessarily got. When they come to the committing to a solution stage, that's kind of where the real hardcore, we can, as salespeople, we can start to get involved and tell them what we've got to offer that might solve their problem. Justifying the decision then is things like trying to prove the ROI and prove the benefit and kind of back up those decisions that were made earlier about the need to change and the reasons why you were changing. And finally, making the decision, that's about them finally kind of getting their PO book out or getting their checkbook out and making that decision and making it happen. So if that's the process that customers are going through, what do we need to do at each of those stages to kind of counter that or at least kind of help them along the journey? So at the beginning, it's all about awareness and early need identification. We need to help with our content open their eyes, I guess, to the opportunities to do things differently and show them that there is a new or different way of doing things. Next along, we have to influence how they define their problem and their solution. So if we can engage with customers earlier and influence the way they think about the problems they have in their business, then we can quite craftily lead them towards what we have to say and what we have to sell, because we're able to influence them at that early decision-making point. The next step, as I said, is all about demonstrating that we have the most compelling proposition. So that's all about engaging in a consultative sell, understanding their challenges, and being able to propose our solutions and products as the best alternative to the status quo. Then justifying the decision is all about maximizing the deal value. So we need to prove to the buyer that all the things that we said in our marketing collateral and all the promises we made in our sales meetings actually are going to come true. We will be able to solve your problem and it will pay for itself in X number of months or years. Making the selection is all about ensuring that the customer gets onboarded effectively, and this is quite often part of the sales journey that's actually forgotten, because once someone signs a check, the deal is done and we move on to the next thing. No one actually cares about how that customer is onboarded and the experience that they have in consuming our products and services. And that part of the journey is really critical, because if a customer feels that they've kind of been set up or they've been sold something that hasn't delivered on what we promised during the sales process, they're certainly not going to become advocates. They're not going to tell other people about how good we are, and they're certainly not going to become an opportunity for us to cross or upsell in the future, because they think that we're not honest about our sales and marketing process. So that's their journey and what we need to do. So I guess you guys might be sitting there thinking that's all very nice in principle, but how can we effectively move people along this journey? How can we help? And this is where the content marketing story comes in. So by creating the right content and by signposting people from one piece of content to the next, or the next logical piece of content in a journey, we can help them move along that journey at their own pace, but also through things like marketing automation and some of these more sophisticated digital tools that are available today. We can move people along at a faster pace and in the direction that we are trying to get them to go in. So I thought in terms of this content marketing, this is the same buyer journey, although I've added these blue dots at the top. Same buyer journey, but I thought it might be interesting to share with you what types of content people are looking for typically at different stages of that journey. This is based on some research by IDG, and they're one of the biggest IT and tech media brands in the world. I'm sure you've heard of them. So they've got access to lots of IT decision makers, and they ask these questions. So I'll just run through this briefly. You can have a copy of the slides afterwards, of course, to refer to in your own time. But generally, when people are looking to start to challenge that status quo, they need to become aware of these big trends, tech trends, new ways of doing things, things that are very hyped and over-talked about, like cloud computing, big data, Internet of Things, all those big topics. We need to try and enthuse and excite people to think, oh, there is a different way of doing this. We could do something better, and it might be better for our business. So feature articles about trends and strategies, analyst research from guys like IDC and Gartner, also vendor-owned content, and you guys as partners probably get this kind of content from Microsoft, for example, because they're the guys that have these opinions about big trends and big technologies. Next step along is committing to change. So that's when they're starting to think, oh, if big data is something that I need to address or try and harness in my business, what are the kinds of things that I could do? So this is when we need to try and convince them that there is good options out there. So things like product testing, product demos, and again, analyst research. Sometimes the analysts go a little bit further than setting up an idealistic view of things, and they go forward to a step where they're talking about how we can make things happen. The next two steps are very kind of product-centric. So at that stage, we need to be talking about our products and how they tap into these big trends and can deliver value against the thing that that customer wants to do in their business. So things, again, like product testing, lots of reviews. Case studies are a great way of showcasing that you as a partner, or you in partnership with a brand, have been able to make a change in someone's business. So it's really about delivering the proof at that stage. Justifying the decision is all about going back, so that buyer needs to go back to the business and say, yeah, this is a good decision for us to make. This is what the return on investment is going to be. This is what the transformation is going to look like, and this is what the end goal, the end benefit will be. So things like ROI calculators, again, the case studies are really good for demonstrating the value that has been delivered in other situations or other client examples. And then finally, making the selection is when it comes down to actually biting the bullet and writing the check. So things like vendor directories, competitive analysis, competitive kind of data sheets and battle cards that really very pointedly say that you're the best option. So the customer's got to the point where they're going to go with someone. It's our job to convince them that that someone should be us. So in looking at that kind of landscape and the customer journey, you're probably thinking, that's a hell of a lot of content. How can I possibly make that much content? And I think it's true that a lot of companies, content marketing is such a hype thing, and a couple of years ago it was the darling of B2B marketing. We all jumped on the bandwagon. I think it's easy to get carried away and think that we just need to create lots and lots of content. Our approach at Direction Group is that you don't have to create something new every time. And we talk about atomization, which is effectively taking one piece of hero content and then breaking it up into lots of different chunks. And that works well in a number of ways. One, in that you don't have to pay and create big bits of content regularly. So one piece of content can be worth a lot of value in terms of the amount of outputs that it has and the amount of time and value you can get out of it. But also it means that you can appeal to different types of buyers and their attitudes and kind of appetite for different types of content. So some people will prefer to learn things through text. Some people will love to read a 20-page white paper. Some people will hate it. Some people will want to watch a 2-minute video. Some people will want to have something visual like an infographic. So different types of people want to learn about things in different ways. So by breaking up something into lots of different chunks and formats, we can kind of answer to those requirements. So typically we take a piece of hero content, say that's a research report or a white paper. Maybe Microsoft or a partner have given you that content from their kind of repositories. Your job then is to break that up. So you could create some blog articles and put them on your website. You could create a SlideShare summary of the content. You could create an ebook. You could create a webinar with some of your internal experts or your pre-sales guys. A podcast could be created even from the voice, or the audio clips from the webinar could be turned into a podcast. You could do some LinkedIn posts. You could create a press release. You get the idea. There's lots of opportunities for you to take that one piece of core content and break it up into lots of different bits. So once you have the content right, then what do you need to do? So all that content across the buyer journey is going to make a pretty much of a mess in terms of trying to track engagements and understand somebody downloading this asset means that they're like this and they're at this stage of the buyer journey. And this is where marketing automation comes in. So marketing automation allows us to start tracking all those interactions and making meaningful insights from them. We can start to talk about outcomes and not outputs. So we can start shifting our focus from talking about the responses to an email or how many people downloaded something. We can actually see how those actions are contributing to their journey towards a sale. Now, the challenge with digital marketing in general is that everything can be tracked. You can track clicks, opens, bounce rates, you can click interactions, engagement rates, you can click gonaways, bounces, all sorts of stuff. And sometimes it's easy for analysis paralysis to kick in, where you've got so much information that you can't possibly do anything with it. So the thing that we need to focus on is to stop thinking about opens and clicks and favorites and all those kind of metrics that don't really mean anything on their own, and start talking about lead volume. So that's how do those interactions and those things that people are doing with our content, how do they add up to make a lead? Well, how do we define a lead, and how much value is behind that lead? And not only the value, then, for the business to understand what they need to keep investing in marketing, we need to also be able to talk about the velocity of those leads and how quickly they're going to come into the business. So the key things are for us lead volume, lead value, and lead velocity. So let's take another look at marketing automation in a bit more detail and how it works with CRM. So let's first of all look at what we can get out of it. So we can deliver more sales-ready leads. And that means that because of the way that we can track interactions, we can define what a lead is and then monitor how many of those we're getting through our marketing processes. We can improve productivity by allowing the prioritization of follow-up. So no longer will inside sales guys be expected to follow up on every email open or every download of an ebook or every download of a data sheet. We can start to build up a picture of a prospect's activity and behavior over time, and then give the sales guys a picture of what that person's been doing and how engaged they are in the sales process. So that through lead scoring, which is basically attributing a number to different interactions. So an opening of an email might get you 1 point, whereas a downloading of a white paper might get you 5 points. So you can see that different scores are allocated to different activities depending on how active that person is in engaging with that content. So by allowing the sales guys to see the scoring that we're applying to these leads, they can start to pick off the low-hanging fruit, follow up with those first, and then if they've got the bandwidth to continue calling lower and lower down the scores, then that's up to them. But we can allow them to prioritize, which means they're going to lose less sales opportunities, but they're definitely going to get to speak to the right ones. This is another stat from Forrester. So 61% of marketers send all leads to sales, but only 27% of those are qualified or ready for sales. So the marketing automation allows us to put a stop to that kind of activity, where only the leads that are ready to go to sales for follow-up are passed on, because we can see how warm that lead is or isn't. We can shorten the sales cycle through automated actions. Paul mentioned earlier that marketing automation allows us to automate the process of communication rather than consistently blasting or waiting until the next email has been scheduled in a month's time to send the next piece of communication. So those automated actions allow people to move through the customer journey much quicker. And although, of course, people are only going to move at their own speed, we don't want to be a hindrance to them moving forward. So we don't want them to have to wait for another 2 weeks to get that data sheet, because that's when the system says it's going to get sent. We want them to get it as they need it. So the automation allows that to be escalated and made more rapid. We can also track the value of every campaign. So again, when we limit ourselves to talking about clicks and opens and interactions and favorites, we're not really proving the value of what we're doing, and marketing doesn't seem to be an investment that's paying back. So what we can do is to start to show what outputs and outcomes we're getting from our campaign budgets, rather than just saying, you know, we've managed to get this many downloads, or we've grown our follower numbers by this percentage. We can focus on meaningful metrics. I think I've covered that off. We can also recognize the value of assets at our disposal. So it allows us to see from our world of content, so say we've got in a campaign, we've got 10 pieces of content, we can automatically see through the use of marketing automation tools which of those content assets are behaving best. And we can identify what kinds of content resonates best with our audiences. And from that information, we can build better campaigns in the future. And then finally, we can increase retention and deal size. And I think you probably are thinking that that sounds a little bit incredible. But the Forrester research has actually found that companies who do nurturing well generate 50% more sales-ready leads at a fraction of the cost. So again, there's less wastage in your lead generation activity, and you're holding on to customers and nurturing them. So you're able to deliver more value back to the business at a lower cost. Not only that, but nurtured leads make 47% larger purchases than non-nurtured leads. So again, that's due to the fact that we're building up a relationship with customers over time by communicating with them on topics that are interesting to them, not just spamming them with anything we fancy saying. So we're building up a meaningful relationship, and it's actually giving us an opportunity to communicate with them about things that we might not have guessed that they were interested in at all. So that outputs as an increased ability to cross and upsell. So let's have another look at marketing automation and CRM and on what the difference is. Generally speaking, marketing automation is all about prospects. So it's the tool that we use to do our acquisition marketing, our lead and demand generation, whereas CRM is mostly about customers. And if you don't have a marketing automation system, you're a little bit more likely to have a CRM system already in the business. And it's probably the system that your sales guys use to keep a track of their contacts and their engagements with their contacts. But by joining the two together, we can get a lot more value. And this is what we call lead to revenue management. So it's being able to track through an integrated process from marketing automation through to CRM, the process of a customer's first interaction, all the way through to the point where they buy, and then from the point where they buy to the point where they become a repeat customer or a customer that we can sell more and more things to. So this approach can help us change perception of marketing from a cost center to a key contributor to top business priorities. So again, not only are we're no longer limiting ourselves to talking about clicks and interactions, which the business is fundamentally not very interested in. We can start talking about customer acquisition, customer retention, and revenue growth, which are much more interesting business-centric topics, which will help marketing get a bit more noticed and a bit more value from their engagements with the business leadership. So how can B2B marketers get a seat at the table? We've talked about this a little bit, but it basically comes down to tracking the bottom line impact of every dollar that you invest. And invest is the key word here, because we always talk about marketing investment or return on investment, but marketing is so often not thought of as an investment because no one's tracking the return on that investment. If I was a wealth manager and I said to you, if you give me 100 grand, I'll invest it for a year, but I don't know what I'm going to give back to you after that year. That wouldn't be a very compelling investment for you. So similarly, from a marketing perspective, we continually ask for our marketing budget, but we're not really accountable about what we're delivering back to the business as a return on that investment. So marketing automation and CRM systems, when they're used in conjunction with each other, make it able for us to track how investments generate leads, how those leads become opportunities, and how opportunities become sales. So we're basically working all the way down the funnel, and at its very most simple basis, it means that we can say to marketing, if you give me $1, I'll give you $3 back, or if you give me $10, I'll give you $300 back, or whatever your return on investment ratio ends up being. But that's a much more compelling way to address a business and ask for investment and budget than for you to say, can you give me 10 grand because I want to communicate about this? And that's the end of that story. There's nothing else that comes after that. So my question to you is, can anybody in the room measure the revenue that's generated from your marketing investment? So not the number of leads or the numbers of opportunities or the numbers of people that the sales guys can call, the level of revenue that you'll get from that marketing. I kind of suspected that the answer would be no. Let me tell you about a little kind of a new emerging trend that's coming mostly from the States, but I think it's something that we're going to hear a lot more of here in the UK, and it's called revenue marketing. So it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's marketing with a focus on revenue, but it's about the development of repeatable prospecting programs that drive customer acquisition, and the focus is, of course, on revenue. And the key to it is this predictability. And at its very purest form, it would mean that you are able to say to the marketing director, if you give me 100 grand, I know how much I can give you back. And it also means that the business can start to see marketing as a lever that it can act and it can use to manage revenue opportunity within the business. So if it knows that pipeline for Q4 is down, it knows that because it's down 50 grand or 100 grand, I know that I need to invest 10 or 20 grand in marketing. It just allows that transparency and the kind of predictability that you would expect from any other investment in the world, or even in your personal lives. So it might seem a little bit visionary, but of course it's a journey. And the journey looks a little bit like this. So the more traditional marketing organizations amongst us will be in this kind of Marcom function, but what the Rise of the Revenue Marketeer is the book that has kind of proffered this theory about revenue marketing, and they call the Marcom function the traditional marketing organization. So that's when marketing and sales operate very independently of each other. There's no real B2B lead generation, and the focus for the marketing team is mainly on maintaining corporate communications, brochureware, collateral, press releases, things like that. The next step along is the emergence of this lead generation center within marketing. And that's when we do email-based communications. It's still very tactical, and the focus is on cost of lead generation. So this is where you might use third parties to get your messages out, and you're measuring the value of marketing on the number of leads generated. So that's the point where we've moved away from just being a comms team to focusing on actually generating leads. At this point, there's not very much sales and marketing kind of interaction or collaboration. The next step along is demand generation, and this is typically where most of our clients sit when they first come to us, or maybe somewhere between lead generation and demand generation. This is when we start to use marketing automation and CRM, and we're starting to track what we call demand, which is a bigger entity than leads by itself. We start to do things like lead nurturing. We talk about the marketing funnel. A lot of people talk about the marketing funnel being dead and we shouldn't talk about funnels anymore. But it's still quite a useful tool in terms of trying to identify the process that we go through to get someone to come from being an unknown entity to us to becoming a customer. So at this stage, it's all about trying to align marketing and sales through the use of marketing automation and CRM, bringing those together so that we've got that lead to revenue management idea that I talked about earlier. And then the total utopia is when we've got revenue marketing, and that's when our systems are optimized. Sales and marketing are a revenue team, so we're not thinking about sales and marketing as distinct. We're all in it for the same goals, so they're a collaborative joint effort. And that predictability comes into play where we can say that for every dollar that we spend on marketing, we can predict the outcome. We know that we've got a kind of industrialized engine, and what we do is repeatable and scalable. And that's when marketing becomes a real asset to a business, because it's a much more flexible resource and it can meet the needs of the business rather than being seen as just a cost center. So I guess I'm sure a lot of you are thinking that you can kind of see yourself somewhere on that journey. And again, the revenue marketing idea is a little bit idealistic, I guess, because marketing doesn't own revenue yet. And then this is where the sales guys come in. So we talked a lot about the B2B buyer and how that's changing the role for marketing, but it's also changing the role for sales. And fundamentally, buyers are disappointed with sales engagement. And I will back this up for anybody that's a salesperson in the room. So let's talk about how this is changing the world for sales. If buyers are engaging with sales guys later, they're coming to the table with a whole different set of expectations. So it's not good enough for some sales guys to be engaging at that stage with product collateral and product messaging and a kind of hard sell based around just the core functionality of offerings. Because the buyer has already got all that information online thanks to us marketing people. So we put the marketing collateral online, people are self-serving, they're self-educating, they're learning about the solutions, so they sure as hell don't need to get that information played back to them when they engage with sales. So what they're looking for is something different. And the challenge here is that buyers sometimes actually see sales as an obstacle to getting through the journey because they're actually setting them back on their path. This stat is from IDC last year, and they found when they spoke to some B2B technology buyers that they felt that 31% of the sales reps that they engaged with weren't even equipped with the basic level of web available information that was available to them. So basically, when you're having a sales meeting, you're looking for value add, and these guys were experiencing that when they engaged with sales, they actually knew more about the products and services on offer than the sales guy. So what is it we think really matters to B2B buyers in this case? Things like price might be important, or the brand that's offering the solution might be important. Some brands rest very heavily on their brand awareness and the brand kind of recognition and the perception that they have. But interestingly, brand, offering and price make up less than 50% of what a B2B buyer thinks is important. And interestingly for us, sales experience, it makes up the other half, more than the other half actually. So that's pretty interesting in terms of in a time when the sales engagement is so much later, the importance is still there. Sales guys are very important to the buying process, and we mustn't forget that and think that, us as marketers, we run the show now, sales are the guys at the end, they come in at the last minute and close the deal. They're actually very important. But more specifically than sales experience, this is what the buyers are looking for. So they're looking for unique, valuable perspectives on the market. They're looking for help in navigating the alternatives. So they want you to, in a kind of non-brand sensitive way, help them understand what the differences in the solutions on the market are, and not to kind of take advantage of them and lead them down the garden path, leading, of course, to our solutions. They want ongoing advice and consultation. They want you to help them make a better decision. They want you to help them identify and avoid landmines, so solutions or technologies that they shouldn't be considering in trying to solve a certain problem. They're looking for advice and guidance fundamentally. But that's pretty far removed from the tech specs, feeds and speeds that some sales guys come to these meetings equipped with. So again, there's a gap. So for that kind of sales guy, 90% of what he says and does is not going to move the needle, because they've already got all that information online, and the interaction is not going to be a valuable one for the buyer. So his greatest barrier is his inability to demonstrate value, or a lack of customer knowledge. And the reason that is his challenge is because he's not getting the support he needs to deliver a compelling message to change client behavior. So this is when we start to talk about marketing, reaching out and trying to help or deliver some kind of sales enablement. So sales enablement is all about ensuring that every seller has the required knowledge, skills, processes and behaviors to optimize every interaction with buyers. And that's not just about the products and solutions. It's basically, we need to help, as marketeers, we need to help the sales guys to deliver that value that the customers are looking for in that 53% of the experience. So they're looking for advice, best practice, tangible business impacts ahead of standalone product pitches or solutions. What that means for marketing is that we need to not only help align sales conversations to marketing messages, so we need to make sure that what they are saying when they engage with our buyers is the same as what we've been saying through our communications and our content, but we also need to help them reframe the sales conversation to focus on that added value. Because fundamentally, in an organization that any sales guy is engaging with, there's going to be budget makers, and those are the guys that will make a project happen, and the budget takers, who are the guys who are asked to make the project happen. And the problem is that if you engage with an organization and you talk about feeds and speeds and features and functions and price and delivery, you will get delegated to the person that you sound like, which is you going down the hierarchy. Whereas if you want to have that high-level engagement in a consultative capacity where you can add value, you need to be talking about issues and insights, learnings from peers, and visions and strategies. And that's the way that you can engage with this new B2B buyer and deliver the value they're looking for. So as a bit of a summary then, we need to close the gap. The cycle looks a bit like this, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. So marketing creates lots of leads. Sales say the leads are weak. Sales guys stop calling the leads. Marketing says that sales is weak because they're not calling your leads. Marketing stops getting any ROI. And then people get fired, or marketing teams get disbanded or changed or reorganized. And it's a cyclical thing. It keeps happening because the problem doesn't get solved. So what we need to do is close that gap and break the cycle. And all that to say that companies with aligned sales and marketing generated 208% more revenue from marketing, and that was last year. So the sales and marketing integration part of this story is critical, albeit that it comes at the end of the customer journey that I've been talking to you about today. So in conclusion, steps for success are that by owning the customer lifecycle through clever use of marketing tactics and technology, marketers can prove their own worth, bridge the gap between sales and marketing, and also deliver against business objectives. So my parting thoughts to you in terms of steps for success: embrace today's new buyer. We've talked about how they're changing. We need to make that our common knowledge. We know that buyers are different and we need to act differently. So embrace the buyer. Stop thinking about sales and marketing as separate. We're all in it for the same goal. We can work together and collaboratively, and I know that that's a challenge. Sales and marketing have always been the two at loggerheads. But let's join forces and do this properly and engage to own the customer journey right from the beginning all the way to hopefully what will never be an end, because we'll get perpetual customers. Change your language, and that's about not talking about marketing budget, but talking about marketing investment. Marketing has always been asked to deliver a return on investment, but no one has ever really considered marketing budget as an investment. So we need to try and change that. And finally, once you've got all those kind of good basics in place, you need to support your intentions with good technology, and that comes down to things like marketing automation and CRM systems. Thank you.